Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final Discover Tennessee History webinar in the 23-24 school year series. We're really excited to have you join us for today's session. And it is a bit of a joint session. This is officially the East Tennessee Historical Society's month, but I am tagging along with Lisa to talk about a project we've been working on jointly. But before we get into the content for today, just a couple of quick reminders. If I can get my screen to advance. All right. So again, we are recording this for inclusion for folks who want to catch it later. So be sure to keep your mics muted throughout unless you're responding to questions or we're having discussion. It just helps us to have a cleaner audio. Also, if you're joining us live, be sure that we are seeing your first and last name in the chat box. It just helps us to know kind of who we're talking to. And again, we always want folks who have the opportunity to join us live to make these sessions as interactive as possible. So as we're going through, feel free to open the chat box, ask questions, make comments. We will be monitoring that and responding to that throughout the session. And again, feel free to use the reaction buttons. Again, I think one of the perks to being able to listen live is, again, being able to interact with your fellow attendees and the presenters. So definitely make use of that. We have an ongoing Padlet for the Discover Tennessee History webinar series, which has been ongoing since 2020. So there are a lot of sessions, a lot of information on the Padlet. You can access it either via the web link here or using the QR code. And again, we'll be posting information from today's sessions. I've already got the slides up for today, but we'll be posting other things again based on some of your feedback during the session. And of course, then you can also go back and find information, recordings for all of the others that have been in this series since we got started a few years ago. So with that, we're gonna switch gears here just a moment. See, hold on, let me stop share for just a second. Makes it a little easier. Switch my PowerPoint to the other one. Okay. So our session for today, a local look at the founding of the nation. And as I mentioned, again, this is a joint session with Teaching with Primary Sources and the East Tennessee Historical Society. So a couple of things before I kind of turn things over to Lisa for just a moment. So as I mentioned, this presentation really kind of grew out of an ongoing project that we have been doing that was funded through the Teaching with Primary Sources Midwest Regional Grant Program that we started a little over a year ago now. And this is again, a project where we're working in partnership with the Knox County Schools. And our goals really were multifold depending on the organization. This is one thing I thought was really cool is that as we entered this project, all of our organizations had different goals, but we were able to kind of think about different ways to meet those through this project. And so, for our TPS program, we were thinking about, what were some of the content gaps that we have within the materials that we've created over the years, and do we have materials that maybe need to be updated, specifically looking at the 8th grade curriculum standards. I'll let Lisa speak to some of her goals and needs there, and then for Knox County, they were thinking about, how they could, work with some of their training teachers on inquiry, on using primary sources, and how to increase student engagement and improve instruction in this kind of post-COVID world where there's a lot of challenges going on with how we get students to reconnect and how we specifically get them excited and engaged in the content that we're teaching for especially early U.S. history, which seems very removed from them. So, Lisa, do you want to speak to, before we go on, do you want to speak to some of the goals for ETHS?
Sure. And I want to just reiterate one aspect to this. We were already talking off and on. The partners knew each other. We've worked together in the past. And so a lot of the ideas that came about for this project were because Kira made us aware that this regional grant was available to us. And so it was just in staying in touch with our partners, staying in communication, that we found out about this opportunity. And then we began talking, as she said, about what our needs and goals were. And for us, especially post-COVID, it was figuring out when was best to offer professional development at the East Tennessee History Center. I'm with the East Tennessee Historical Society. We're partners in the East Tennessee History Center, which is in downtown Knoxville, across from the Tennessee Theater. So we do local professional development for teachers, but we also work as a key partner with folks from across the state who come to our site to host workshops, or to deliver workshops, and we host. So part of it was just finding out, what do people need now as far as logistically, because that's how we as a partner can help most, is in facilitating workshops, and helping in getting the word out. But it was kind of knowing what's the lay of the land now, in more of a logistical way, so that we could be most helpful with that. So that's where we were coming from.
So one of our first sessions with the group from Knox County that we worked with when we met in person was trying to figure out what topics that we wanted to explore as we embarked on this grant project. And so we did that, utilizing student results on benchmark testing. And so I actually had, the results that had come in recently from one of the benchmark tests that the students had completed. And so again, looking at that raw data to see where students were struggling, and if we could see points where with each of the teachers that their students were struggling in similar places. Then we also just kind of discussed, amongst the teachers, what standards presented the most challenges for them to teach. Now, whether that is because of timing and some of those 8th grade standards, including multiple concepts and key points and, a single standard that you're trying to, blaze through in a day or so. And so in the midst of that discussion, one thing that we found surprising was really kind of what content they wanted to focus on. And by and large, the curriculum unit on the founding nations, again, that is the one where we talk about the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, and that whole period, was one that almost every standard in that unit was one that had been referenced in the course of our discussion. And again, that really wasn't what we anticipated going into this. So it was really kind of surprising that that was where they landed. And so we decided as we moved forward that we would really focus again on that particular unit and the standards in that unit, and started going forward, developing some, free work that we could do, looking at some of the lesson plans that Teaching with Primary Sources had previously developed to give them kind of a frame of reference, some readings, some webinar recordings before we got to kind of our big PD event for this project, which was a summer workshop.
Okay. So with that idea in mind, I was in attendance. One of our roles in this grant project, like I said, is logistics and helping facilitate for the partners. As a nonprofit, sometimes that's easier than it is for universities and for school systems. We can help facilitate the fiscal management of grants and that sort of thing more quickly and efficiently, as well as provide space and help in planning programs, especially once you get into looking at what are we going to do experience-based, not just in classroom kind of instruction, but what can we do with teachers? How can we get outside the 4 walls and do some experiential things? So we have experience with this. Like I said, we're located, our headquarters is in downtown Knoxville, but we partner and we serve 35 counties of East Tennessee, and also work widely throughout Tennessee in partnership with some of the folks you're familiar with, and that you, as part of the Discover Tennessee History Consortium, if you've attended the other webinars. So we were in a good position to help with this grant. We've worked for now more than 25 years with Humanities Tennessee on teacher professional development. We've had larger grants from U.S. Department of Ed on teacher professional development. And the signature piece of these grants that we've done for professional development, part of it is in a room with information and content being delivered as in the standard way with a professor or an expert in the field to share content, as well as somebody to come in and talk about strategies and examples. But one of the other signature pieces to what the Historical Society has done in the past and really enjoys doing is actually going out into the field, actually going places and experiencing history as it occurred on the ground, if you will, at historic sites, museums, historic landscapes, bringing in local historians, museum staff, public historians. And so we've always had kind of a combination of those elements. And with most of our Humanities Tennessee grants, the focus was on Tennessee history. When we've worked with Kira and with other partners, we look at what's their mission, what are they looking at? And for Library of Congress and teaching in primary sources, that's typically a much broader topic. Something that's more, we may use Tennessee stories and resources, but it's based on the collection from the Library of Congress and broader standards. And what my ears perked up with as we were talking to the teachers and they were talking about this standard and kind of this era that they were struggling with, is they mentioned the state of Franklin standard, talking about the weaknesses and the strengths, and particularly the weaknesses of this, how the state of Franklin kind of showed the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. And so we'd actually, like Kira said, we were kind of surprised at what people were saying they were struggling with. A lot of the feeling we got was there were just so many elements to the standard and so many things going on that it was hard for them to find a way to connect things. It was hard for them to find a way, certainly with this little Tennessee history piece out here that they didn't know anything about. It was the last thing on their list to try to figure out how to work in. And so it was a real challenge. And I think a lot of times when people talk about Tennessee history, especially as it relates to embedded standards, someplace where it occurs in a broader American history standard, it's really a challenge to figure out, well, how can I do that? That doesn't, that's not an easy fit. So with my role, kind of project director, facilitator, I started thinking about, okay, in this project design, in this project plan, as we go forward, especially looking to the summer, we planned a summer program and a summer tour. What can we do to bring this on board? And fortunately, I've been at this job now for over 30 years and have had an opportunity to go lots of places and work with a lot of different museums and partners. And so that was kind of my role, was to figure out, well, how can we bring this history to life and where can we go? What can we look at to look at the standard broadly? But particularly my interest was bringing in this Tennessee history component. So that was a surprise to me that quickly we would be getting right into local history, place-based history experiences that would hit directly at what their standards are. So integrating local history, a lot of times it's a way to think about, you have a broad history standard, but that Tennessee history or that local history piece is not spelled out there. So a lot of times we don't think about thinking our own school history, our landscapes around us, our family histories, that sort of thing, being able to be something we can bring in the classroom. But particularly if you have historic house museums, if you have living historians, if you have local historians, your local library, but particularly museums and historic sites, state parks, a lot of those state parks have cultural stories. Those places have staff typically and volunteers that can really bring things to life for the students, but also can help you as a resource. So integrating local history, look for where that local history is focused in your community and who is involved with it. And a lot of times those folks might not be paid staff, they may be volunteers. But just think of that. And all of these elements, it all has to do with experiencing the history. Not only hearing the content from the people that are there, but actually being in a place involves all your senses, and it helps to differentiate instruction as well. And I'm saying, we don't ourselves take school groups out, but we take teacher groups out, and you are a student too. And so by going to these sites and places, it engages you as a teacher differently and engages your creativity and your thoughts and ideas for lessons. So all the things that we talk about for students with doing, site visits, if you want to say field trips, we don't typically we call them experiences, or we call them labs, or what expeditions, whatever. But they help bring things to life for you. It helps make things a personal connection. You can also do this virtually. Um, but it also scales those broad topics to something on a much more local level, something that's manageable, something you can find primary sources, maybe not that difficult a way, by reaching out. If you just think about the broad story and just taking it down to a more local scale. And it provides lots of partnerships for your schools, and grant projects and that sort of thing. So, these are all positive things about using local sources and local resources. And so for that summer plan for this past summer, we kind of integrated a lot of these aspects. So our plan was, and Carrie, you're going to have to remind me, I think we were 3 days or 2.5 days anyway. And that seems to be a good amount of time for you as a teacher. If you plan on doing something like this for yourself, give yourself some time. Go to a number of places, spend a day and a half there, spend a day. Don't just take, one trip is great, especially if it's local. But if you go to more than one place, a lot of times you build on information, especially if they're all related in a time period or something that you're looking at. And that's what we did. We looked at this beginning of, this new nation, that were actually more the founding time, the founding nation, the state of Franklin, U.S. Constitution, and we went up to Tennessee statehood. So the state of Franklin, for those of y'all that are not from East Tennessee and haven't taught Tennessee history standards at some point in the past, it was a statehood effort prior to 1796. It comes during the period of time of the Articles and Confederation. And in East Tennessee, a lot of these Revolutionary War up through statehood events took place in East Tennessee, particularly in Northeast Tennessee, close to the Virginia line. And so the site that you see, we're looking at the back side of it with the L, the kitchen wing of it, with the small herb garden, the kitchen garden there. That's the Tipton Haynes Historic Site in in Johnson City, Tennessee. And that site, especially the core house the large house towards the front, and actually the back of it's much more interesting than the front looks. But this property actually played a role during the state of Franklin. There was a small battle fought. John Sevier was captured and all this drama happened, and they can tell you the story about it. But a lot of that happened here on this property. And Tipton was a North Carolina, he was kind of on the North Carolina side, if you will. He had a official role in North Carolina government locally. And then Sevier, of course, was one of the Franklinites, really trying to fight for that statehood status for Franklin, which failed, of course. And later in 1796, which you see to the far right, historic site is Blunt Mansion in Knoxville, which was the territorial capital in the 1790s. And then the Constitution was written in the small, and we don't have it, actually, it doesn't show up in this picture. It's to the far right of the picture, kind of over in the garden space, in Governor Blunt's his office, in the governor's office is where the state constitution was written, and then it was signed in another location. But, the one thing I think that struck the teachers, and it strikes me every time I go, is you go to these places and you're seeing and standing in the places where these things happened. So it integrates your imagination, your creativity. You begin to recall information, or if you don't recall, you gain information from the people that are there sharing the stories, the conversation that goes on with other folks that are there, the conversation that goes on, if you would, with your students later or beforehand in preparation, or with cohort of teachers that you might be with. It just takes what you've learned in the classroom and not only extends it, but deepens it and widens it into how it can apply into other things that you're learning. The other two sites, one is in the top corner, is the Museum of East Tennessee History, which is more of a standard exhibition style museum. And we did a brief tour there. And then in the center is the John Sevier. Actually, that is his grave. He was disinterred from Alabama and brought and reinterred there on the courthouse lawn in Knoxville. And then Bonnie Kate, his wife, was also reinterred to the right. So, you know, there was content delivered. We had Dr. William Hardy was with us. He kind of placed things in context. There were readings. Kira had been working through lessons. Folks had been reading beforehand and working with lessons beforehand as well as after. But this was just kind of a time to just relax, come and enjoy these educational opportunities. But everything we were doing was adding to the content that people had been learning, what they've been doing in the classroom, but in a new and creative way, in a fun way, and I think in a valuable way. So the state of Franklin is where the conversation started when we had the cohort first come together. And some folks decided to stay with the state of Franklin, but I think just about everyone, and we did not say, we want you to use state history. We want you to choose a topic that relates to Tennessee history. It was their choice what lesson they wanted to revise or work with. But I think, and Kira, you can clarify this, most everyone ended up choosing a topic based on, or the resources or some element, it might have been a biography or whatever, some element out of that summer ended up informing the lesson that they did. Some of us, some museums, some historic sites can customize programs for you. They have prepared programs that can fit right into your curriculum. Most of us are aware of the curriculum and try to really work inside the curriculum so that we can really be a benefit to you and your students. A lot of them provide professional development. But again, this was more free form. This is like going in, experiencing, not having anyone deliver specific content to what we were doing, just going in and enjoying the tours and talking with folks and seeing then how that could inspire and enrich the lessons that we were working on. So I think my takeaway from this was that it was just a re-emphasis to me of the value of historic sites, museums to enrich the curriculum. And you don't have to have it itemized in the standards, although you have to teach the standard. What I would say is all history is local. Everything played out on our local landscape. It's just finding the resources. And for Tennessee, we have incredible educational team at Tennessee State Library and Archives, State Museum. Kira, many of her lessons with TPS incorporate Tennessee history aspects. You know, state parks have great cultural resources. All the partners within the Discover Tennessee History Consortium have great primary sources, and some have museums, but you also have local resources, folks right next door. And the last thing I would say is, for many of you all, the property your school is on and the neighborhood your school is in also has a rich history that you can delve into sometimes, depending on what era you're teaching, or, you know, the county that you're in. And if you're trying to find a resource for that, if you're trying to find a way to look, great place to go is your library, or to go to your local genealogical historical society. Some people join those for lots of different reasons. Some people enjoy research and doing kind of independent work. And then some people really are interested in working with students and with teachers to help incorporate the resources. So it's kind of wide open as to what you might want to do. But for our particular project, I think the summer was successful. And I was just really tickled to see how, yet again, taking teachers out, taking individuals out to these sites, to the places where things happen, really ended up being inspirational, motivational, and exciting to folks. And I think, and Kira can pick up from here, I think I would even say that what turned out when we first were talking about with the cohort, it was like they dreaded these standards. It's like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this. I mean, it was just all this random stuff. And how do I make it gel? And how can I pull it together? Well, sometimes you're missing the story. You're missing the people or the place, the event that can tie it all together. And in this case, I think we went to places, we were introduced to historical characters from this history here in what now is Tennessee, what at that time was North Carolina, that help them tie all these pieces together. And I think that's what you will find as well. And from, from the earliest indigenous stories all the way up through the curriculum to, more current day, there are resources, people, places that can help you. And I would say, don't start with something you really hate, loathe, and don't know anything about. If you want to try this, try it with something you already are interested in. Reach out, see how it works in your classroom, and work yourself up, or find a partner, as we have. Find a partner that's looking to do something with you that may be able to help you with those more difficult topics. And Kira, I'll hand it over to you, I think.
Yeah, so after the summer workshop, our cohort was tasked with starting to work on either creating a new lesson plan or modifying one of our existing lesson plans from the materials that our TPS MTSU program has created. All of our group except for one, we had one who took on the task of revising a lesson plan that we had. Everyone else decided to create something new, and really did that having been inspired by the different sites that we had visited over the course of the summer during that workshop. And so we didn't limit them. We told them you could teach, you can create this over anything. Our only request was, hopefully it was something that they could teach in the first half of the school year, because we wanted them to have a chance to actually try it out with their students, see how it worked, and then come back and share kind of again what worked well, what didn't work well, and use that to revise the pieces that they were working on. The other thing that we asked of them, of course, was to incorporate primary sources, and specifically at least one primary source from the Library of Congress collections, because we had showed them some great Library of Congress stuff, but we had also exposed them to some of the wonderful materials available through the various museums, historic sites that we had visited in East Tennessee, and then as well as some of the stuff that the State Museum or State Library and Archives has as well. So currently our group they've drafted them, they've test taught them back in the fall, and we are nearing the end now of the revision process, with the expected we expect to be able to publish these on our website sometime in the early summer. And what I wanted to do for you guys today for this session is really to kind of highlight some examples of what the teachers created, some of the cool sources that they found, and how they worked these stories in to, again, teach elements of some of that early founding period. So again, I'm going to walk you guys through some of the information in the drafts, and then again, these sources and stuff again have been posted on the Padlet. So the first one that I want to share is how the lesson plan is how the lost state of Franklin influenced the U.S. Constitution. And this is the one that probably spoke most directly to the exact content that we covered over the course of that multi-day workshop in the summer. In this one, students look at major events of the state of Franklin and how it influenced the U.S. Constitution, how it exposed some of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. They look at excerpts of letters from the founding fathers in the Congress that again are discussing what is happening with the state of Franklin, what their worries are. And then finally, the students analyze Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution and determine how the state of Franklin might have influenced the development of that particular section of the Constitution. This lesson plan was, this was actually two of our members of the cohort did this one together. They teamed up. And as they were looking for materials, they found tons of wonderful primary sources. And so one of their big challenges early on was, how to pare down the number of sources that they found and figure out which ones were the best ones to use with their students so that it would, again, work adequately within classroom instructional time. So for our purposes today, I'm going to show us the version right now. The lesson plan has 6 excerpted text. We're gonna look at 5 of them kind of quickly as we go through. So the lesson plan starts out with just kind of building of some context for Lost State of Franklin, so that again students have some idea of some of the history of Franklin, the people involved, and the so forth, with a timeline activity that you can do to again kind of help students to build out that context. And then students look at 4 documents to again figure out what some of the key founding fathers were saying about this Franklin. And again, what is going on with this discussion of these people that are peppered throughout our curriculum about this little bitty spot in what is now Northeast Tennessee. So one of the first ones, and honestly, the one that I think is, I thought was super cool when we found it. This is a letter to John Sevier from Benjamin Franklin. And this is actually a response from Franklin, as a response to a letter that Sevier wrote him, where he's asking for Franklin's support in getting the state, officially recognized. And of course, mentioning that they are wanting to name their state after Benjamin Franklin, and in honor of him, and again hoping that he will support their efforts. This is the longest of the text excerpts that are in the lesson plan. And you'll note here, and in the other ones we're going to look at, that one thing that the teachers did was that they underlined what they thought were some key passages to again help their 8th grade students to really kind of hone in on what are some key elements in these texts that are going to help us to address these questions of what is going on with the state of Franklin? Why does this matter in the bigger picture of things? And how does this tell us what is some of the problems with the Articles of Confederation at the time? So I'm going to give you guys just a moment to read this, and then we can maybe discuss some key things that you note here in the letter. So, and you can either unmute yourself to add, or if you want to drop this in the text box, what are some things that you find interesting about this particular text? And of course, one thing that's not underlined here that I think you might want to point out to students is here where he's talking about avoiding an Indian war. Again, mentioning, some of the treaties and how that, there was agreements not to go beyond a certain point as we moved west. And so, of course, that what the Franklinites were doing was definitely in violation of some of those treaties. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that, Franklin's like, basically, thank you for this honor, but I can't help you. So yeah, I did find that interesting too. Um, I also think it's, one thing here, another that's not underlined that you could point out, it's essentially saying, in the second paragraph here, you guys should settle your differences, right? But basically it's like based on where you're at, and again, the remoteness of where you're at and the difficulty to govern so remote an area, surely there's a way that you guys can find a middle ground, right? Like there's just problems with like the geography of where you're located. So this should be the motivation to figure it out. Um, so again, yeah, um, yeah, the interest, the mention here, of possible Indian War, and of course, remember that there had been, skirmishes along the, anywhere that kind of frontier area was constantly on folks' mind. So let's look at one of our next documents. And this, again, you can see these are two shorter ones. So the second excerpt that students look at is to George Washington from Thomas Jefferson. And in it, he says, I place um, an immense importance to my own country on this channel of connection with the new Western states. I shall continue uneasy till I know that Virginia has assumed her ultimate boundary to the westward. The late example of the state of Franklin separated from North Carolina increases my anxieties for Virginia. So again, here we have two Virginians, very concerned about what is going to happen to the western portion of Virginia as they see what is unfolding in North Carolina. Because again, had Franklin been successful, who is to say what that would have prompted as far as some of the other Western territories. And then in the third excerpt, you have a letter from James Madison to James Monroe. And they say, I have lately heard that the Kentucky delegates will be instructed to propose to the next session the separation of that country from this, and it's being handed over to Congress for admission into the Confederacy. If they pursue their object through this channel, they will not only accomplish it without difficulty, but set a useful example to other Western settlements, which may choose to be lopped off from other states. My information as to this matter is not authentic, but such as I am inclined to believe true. I hear also that a state is actually set up in the back country of North Carolina, that it is organized, named, and has deputed representatives to Congress. And so again, we see that, this is question of, what is going to happen with these Western areas if all of a sudden we're going to have these new states just popping up and being formed, and what is the process? There's just like this chaotic moment of what do we do about what is going on. And the fourth one, this is a letter from Patrick Henry to Thomas Jefferson. And it says, very different is the condition of North Carolina. Her people settled on the western waters have assumed sovereign power and organized their society into a government similar to that prevalent in the neighboring states. There are severe bickerings between them and their brethren eastward of the great mountains. The new society sent William Cock, perhaps you saw him when formerly a delegate from Washington, to Congress to solicit admission into the Union. His mission was fruitless, though he said the contrary, as I am told. Where this affair will end is hard to say. Perhaps it may turn out to be very interesting. They have about 5,000 men able to bear arms. Very few of their people are of character apt to inspire public confidence. The present poverty of the inhabitants and their future prospects will deter people generally from settling there, especially if the threatened confusions take place. So thinking about these three excerpts, we have these three shorter ones. What are some things that you find interesting about that? What are some common themes that you guys are noting as we have looked at these? And that is actually one thing that that the lesson plan challenges students with, is coming up again. What are the common themes that they are seeing within the excerpts, and what they can deduce about how the founding fathers felt about what was going on in regards to Franklin, and the example that set based on these excerpts. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely this idea that all of them are just kind of worried about the same things, right? This idea of starting a rebellion, consistent attitudes of doubt, wanting to keep the number of states to a minimum. Like again, basically, how do you have organized, thoughtful growth, right? Yeah, and this theme definitely protecting the integrity of the original states. So and I think once you factor in, and I'm not 100% where these men were at with, because I know most of them wind up being land speculators, and so how land speculation might have factored into some of this as well. So definitely all kind of again common themes that you could bring out and point out to students. And the kind of the final question that we pose to students that are posed to students as they're looking through these first four excerpts is, what can we deduce about some of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation based on the comments that we're seeing from these founding fathers on what's going on? Because again, this whole idea of, organized control growth and how the Articles of Confederation really don't address that because they're all like, well, we don't know what's about to happen. You've got delegations showing up from these places, asking to be states. We don't, you just don't know what's going on. Now, the one excerpt that we're not going to look at today is actually a piece from the Journals of the Continental Congress, in which it's basically North Carolina at first says we're just going to give this whole western section over to to essentially what is the federal government. But then after the state of Franklin comes forward, or the people who are trying to be a state of Franklin, they were like, no, the state of North Carolina is like, oh, never mind. We want that territory back. And so that is one of the other excerpts that students look at. And of course, then we get to the point that we have the Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution. And so this one, of course, states, new states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of two or more states or parts of states, without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned as well as of the Congress. The Congress shall have the power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory and other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or any particular state. Of course, the main thing we would want students to focus on is this first portion here, which again is outlining, some of the process for admittance of new states into the Union. And you can see this again, it is directly in response to the Franklinites and some of the others in the West who were trying to become states, and the questions that had, brought to the forefront of again, what is this process going to look like, and how is this going to impact existing states? And so again, I know as we were working through this, I had never realized that Franklin and the state of Franklin had inspired in many ways this portion of the Constitution. And so I found that really interesting. And Lisa, did you have some things that you wanted to add?
Yeah, so I want to go back to what I was talking about how you can go, if you go to historic sites, state park, museum, it's kind of like going to the library shelf to find the call number. So this is what I tell the kids all the time when they're doing research, like for National History Day, which I know writers on from Tennessee Historical Society, that is the state affiliate for National History Day, and we do East Tennessee region. But so many times we're focused on one little element or one keyword or whatever. And so I tell the kids, you find the call number for a book that relates to your topic. Then you go to the library shelf and you see the context for that topic. You see the books on that subject and you see related books around it. And so for this situation, the teachers that developed this lesson plan for that summer, the first site we went to, well, actually, I guess it was probably the second site. I don't remember what order we went in, but we went to Sycamore Shoals State Historic Site. It's part of the state parks system, and it's where Fort Watauga is, and that's where the Watauga settlement was. The Watauga Association, Watauga Treaty was in 1775, just 10 years before that. And so a lot of the people that were involved in this whole situation with the state of Franklin just 10 years before had to figure out a way to gain land ownership of this land that was not being claimed by North Carolina and was not part of Virginia. And so Jefferson first writes about the Wataugans, about this is, this was kind of, and then I think it was the first time there had been an independent government set up on in North America. And so I think it surprises everyone to see that this is on the continental, this is on the revolutionaries and our founding fathers' radar. They kind of know what's going on out here. Not only that, but it's a very personal story for the people to try to figure out how to work together to establish themselves and their property and their government and their civic structure here in this, what has become Western North Carolina counties. So when it makes sense, after they go to these sites, after you go to Watauga, talk about the Watauga Association, then you go to Tipton Haynes and you talk about state of Franklin, then you move up to statehood, you're following the same people through this process over a decade and a little bit more. And you see that it's actually an endeavor of a group of people and their story and in their lifetime. So this is one little piece that if you just take this lesson separately and don't understand it within context, but when they can tie it in their classroom, I can just about guarantee you that those other sites, those other places that we visited come in before this lesson and they come in after the lesson. So that's what having those local history aspects and knowing the people, knowing the places, then you have them in your mind and in your thoughts, and it ends up kind of tying things together as you teach these independent lessons that are so rich in primary sources. They probably had no idea that these resources were there because state of Franklin is so far off our radar. Most people don't know about it. It's this thing. I don't have time to figure it out. And look at the wealth of information that's there and how important and significant this Tennessee story is to our American history and to the building of the Constitution. So, the context is really important, and historic sites and going and doing this on your own helps you figure out the context of the people and the place and the things that happened before and the things that happen after that kind of bookend what you're trying to do in your classroom. So anyway, that's just what I wanted to share and add.
So this is just one of 4 or 5 lesson plans that are in development. And I'm going to share just kind of quickly some of the topics for some of the others so you know kind of what to expect. Then again, that we're going to have available here in the next couple months. So one of the next ones that I wanted to highlight is this one, the Constitutional Convention, analyzing delegates' views on key issues. And of course, our Tennessee connection on this one, William Blount, as Lisa mentioned, we did visit Blount Mansion. And so in this lesson plan, students are assigned, it's a 2-day piece, students are assigned in the first day one of these 4 delegates. They start with reading a biography of the delegates to kind of give them a sense of their background, where they're from, what some of their viewpoints were, what some of the regional interest for their state might have been, with the hope of, again, helping to understand where these individuals would have fallen on issues of, the strength of the federal government, where they would have fallen within the understanding of the Great Compromise and the 3/5 Compromise, so that when students get into kind of understanding of the Constitutional Convention, that they have a better sense of the diverse perspectives and the backgrounds of the delegates, so that they can see how, again, that diversity might have led and did lead to intense discussions and disagreements that had to be worked out through compromise in order to build the framework for the Constitution. And then secondly, that shows students, again, the importance of understanding how vital compromise is to the formation and governing of our country from the very beginning. And so, as I said, this one, again, you start on that first day, they're assigned one of these individuals to read about and kind of get a sense. There's a great exit ticket activity for them to do on the first day. And then the second day they come in, still thinking about their individual from the first day, and they look at some excerpts from the notes of the Constitutional Convention and some of the discussions that happened, and they are tasked with kind of thinking about where their delegate, who he might have sided with as they were working through those issues, and then having to cite from both the text that you read on the first day and the text you read on the second day, again, why they think that person would have, where they would have fallen within the discussion on some of these key issues. So again, it's another, again, really interesting lesson plan that I think kind of gets into this period, and again, has that great local connection with William Blount. One of the others looks at westward expansion to statehood and really does that through the lens of three key individuals. So Daniel Boone, John Sevier, and John Donaldson. And this one I think is actually, it's a really interesting lesson in that you could use it in some ways as almost a recap because you go through and can look at each of these individuals again, thinking about what they were doing at kind of different, a little bit different time periods. They're just a kind of a few years apart as far as to what they're doing as they're moving folks westward. There's also a really interesting collection of sources in this particular lesson. So it's a good mix because, of course, one of the challenges with this period is eighth grade students working with text sources and the challenge that that can present. And so this one, there are some maps that students can work with. There are images like the two that you see here. There is also, there is some text. You have, for example, some excerpts from the Life of John Sevier. It's a book that's available via the Library of Congress. And so again, this is again another way to kind of bring in local history, and again thinking about again how people moved west, what prompted them, and what the role of these three different leaders was like in that process. And then the final one that kind of brought in a local story was the Battle of Kings Mountain. As Lisa mentioned, we did visit Sycamore Shoals, which of course is where some of the Over Mountain men traveled from to get to the Battle of Kings Mountain. And this lesson plan has got she's put together a fantastic PowerPoint that you can use. But students analyzed three different quotes, one spoken before, one spoken during, and one spoken after the battle. She's got some great contextual pieces. So it's just a PBS video portraying the Battle of Kings Mountain that can help to build some context for students. But really, the focus of this lesson plan is understanding why this the very important Southern Battle of the American Revolution, why it mattered, and what its importance is. And again, then it ties back into to Tennessee and to Tennessee history. So those are the ones that we have again that all kind of capitalized on some of those local histories. The other one that is being developed that actually is revising an old lesson plan that we had took on the monumental task of trying to again figure out how do we work through some of these different difficult textual sources with eighth grade students. And she looked at Jamestown and in particular the text of Starving Times, which you guys know in one of the previous iterations of the curriculum standards was actually a required text, and it's quite challenging. So that is the other lesson plan that's being developed out of this project. If you have any questions about any of the content that we've covered today, about how to access the lesson plans, again, right now they're still in the revision process, although we'd be happy to share if anybody would like to have a rough draft. So you can definitely email us questions about that. Lisa, anything you want to add before we get ready to wrap up?
Annie was interested in the Padlet link.
Yeah, I'll show that again in just a moment.
And again, I want to say, there are a lot of folks out there that have information they probably don't even realize that they have that you would be interested in. And I just think that, there's a lot that everybody has to do. And there's a lot to cover and a lot to teach. And so just finding a way to try it, reach out and think about your own community, your own neighbors, partners that maybe you've worked with before, or just the local library, and see if there might be one place to integrate stories. And I know we have a number of folks that are teaching world history, And sometimes what we have teachers do when they come to the museum or they have us work with objects or whatever it might be, is that they're talking about comparing and contrasting. They're using either working with skills that, thinking historically and using skills that they're also working with in their curriculum, but also practicing in, working with museum resources and that sort of thing. But a lot of times too, it's just those common denominator needs, wants, patterns of political, social, economic life today versus, or in the past versus what you're studying about in other places and in far removed places and times. So it actually, I think, makes it engaging and fun. The other thing is, if you do this, if you decide you're on spring break, which I know some folks are on spring break this week, or you go on summer trip and you go someplace, then document your visit. Take pictures, take video. The kids think it's just wild. I mean, we have teachers that'll do video on their camera and then they'll be talking about it and they'll see, something and they'll talk about what they think about it. They'll kind of break down and read that artifact live in the museum or something. So just think about some things you can do to capture your experience and share it in the classroom. And I think the kids will enjoy that. And it might be a place to start where they can replicate. So just some thoughts and ideas. But we really appreciate y'all coming. I appreciate Kira kind of helping me with this one. I think it's been a great project and we hope to grow the work we've been doing. And there are partners around. I couldn't do what I do without the partners we have and the teachers we work with. So I commend everyone for their good and hard work. And yeah, we appreciate y'all attending tonight.
So
And I know
again,
we
we
have some
have,
other folks on too, I think. Go back and look at where people signed in and where they're from, because there's some folks that are coming from other public history institutions or organizations too that might be a good resource for you.
yeah, and we have the Padlet link up here again. And so we'll go back through and look at the chat if the resources and such that we'll share. We'll try to get those posted as well. And as I said, the lesson plans are still in rough draft format right now, but we would be happy to share those if you're interested in getting a copy now. And then we'll have the final versions shared via both Lisa and I's websites once we get into the summer.
And they weren't going to be here, but the teachers are on spring break, so we couldn't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we're standing in for some great teachers.
yeah, we had hoped to have them share their work, but yeah, it's spring break. So a couple quick things as we wrap up. If you happen to have missed any of the webinars in this year's series or in past ones, we do have them all recorded. You can access them via a playlist we have on YouTube. So there's a link there. Again, they're also on the Padlet. You can go through and find them that way as well. And then finally, if you are interested in receiving PD credit for either joining us for today's session or if you're viewing this recording later on, you can do that via the link here. I'm also going to show you a QR code here in just a second. And we'll drop this in the chat box for those of you guys who are live. So here's that QR code. We generate these certificates and send them out about once a week. So once you've completed that survey, it can take up to a week to get your certificate. If for some reason you don't, feel free to reach out to me and we will get that sent out to you. And as always, again, we're always looking for feedback and information on kind of what folks are looking for when it comes to PD. So feel free to include that information in your surveys. The Discover Tennessee History group will be putting together some really cool programming, hopefully for the 250th. And we'll be sharing information about some of those things coming up, hopefully here in the next few months. So definitely be on the lookout for that as well. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you're here live, we'll stick around a few minutes after the recording has ended. If you have questions, you can feel free to stick around and ask those of us. And again, thank you guys, and we hope to see you soon.